Hello, everyone. Welcome back from break. My name is Scott McKenzie. I'm the Senior National Manager of External Affairs for Toyota's operations across Canada. This panel will bring together experts from various sectors to highlight the importance of critical minerals to achieving Canada's net zero future. Panelists will discuss challenges and opportunities in decarbonization and how critical minerals will play a key role in energy transitions. With me today on the panel are Kunal Pfalfer, Chief Strategy Officer for Lifecycle, Chris Bourbos, President and CEO of E3 Metals Corporation, and Stéphane Leblanc, Managing Director of Rio Tinto Iron and Titanium. Welcome, everyone. I'll just hand it over to each of you for a brief personal introduction, and I'll start with Kunal.
Thanks, Scott. As I said, Kunal here, Chief Strategy Officer at Lifecycle. We're about 5.5-year-old company, and in the last 5 years, I've held various positions within the company, from advisor, board member to chief commercial officer, before transitioning into this role, helping us scale globally. Just very briefly on the Lifecycle end, we're focused on resource recovery from lithium-ion batteries. So that's across all types of batteries, and of course, then some of our key products are the critical materials in cobalt, nickel, and lithium that we want to bring back into the supply chain. So we really sit between the end of life and start of life and bridge the gap to create that circular economy. We are a Canadian company, Toronto headquartered, but New York listed now as of last year. And we continue to scale our assets across North America, and now focused on building out assets in Europe and as well as Asia, highlighting the domestication and the localization of the supply chain, which we'll, I assume, get into as we go through the program. So happy to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Kunal. Chris?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be on the panel today amongst some great people. Chris Bourbos, I'm the CEO of E3 Metals Corp. E3 is a lithium development company focused in Alberta. So we're repurposing a historic oil asset here called the Leduc Aquifer and transitioning it in to become a lithium producer. We've developed a technology as well that enables that here based on this pretty massive resource that Alberta holds. Growing a business in Alberta to supply some of the critical minerals to the battery supply chain. So we plan to make a battery quality lithium hydroxide or carbonate or in the future metal that is a direct product into the battery. So I think that's a huge advantage that Canada can bring is this expertise, and very excited to see where we can grow the industry, and obviously the other folks on this panel and others in the industry have a big part to play in that. So absolutely, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And finally, Stéphane.
Thank you, Scott. Very happy to be on the panel today. So I'm Stéphane Leblanc. I'm a managing director in Rio Tinto, more specifically on the iron titanium business. If I talk a little bit about Rio Tinto is one of the biggest miner in the world. We have operation in Australia, mainly in Canada, Africa, and many other countries. We are producing different material from iron ore in Australia to aluminum, copper, and the business I led, iron and titanium, and many products. If we talk more specifically about our operation in Canada, we are around 10,000 employees in Canada, mainly producing aluminum, green aluminum, producing diamond in Northwest Territory, iron ore in Newfoundland, and the business I led in Israel that we produce the product that I will cover in the coming words. The other thing also, we won the largest private sector producer of green hydroelectricity in Canada. So we, as I said, we have many operation people working for us in Canada. If I talk a little bit more about our the business I lead, iron and titanium, we have operation in Canada, we have operation in South Africa, Madagascar, and China. Like I was saying, we produce a titanium product, but also we produce iron, steel, powder, steel and iron powder. We just developed a new process to produce a rare earth that we call a scandium. We are working to develop a new process that I will cover later on lithium with the lowest footprint. And we are producing also concentrate our rare earth from our Madagascar operation. So again, very happy to be on the panel today.
Thanks, Stefan. I think we've got a good set of informed opinions today. So we'll head on to the panel questions. As the world transitions away from fossil fuels, we'll begin to see a more complicated series of required critical mineral inputs to drive global economy. For example, an average electric vehicle requires 6 times the amount of minerals as a conventional car, and also requires materials like nickel, cobalt, and lithium that a conventional vehicle typically does not need. Moreover, wind plants need, according to the IEA, 9 times more mineral resources than a gas-fired plant. So to start us off, my question is, what is the role of critical minerals in decarbonization? And do you view increasing demand as a challenge or opportunity for your organization and for Canada? I'm going to start with Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott. I think that it's looking at it from the broad perspective. I think it ends up being both a challenge and an opportunity. I think Canada produces or can produce, has resources of all of the critical minerals on the critical mineral list that the government of Canada has published. And in that sense, it is a true opportunity for Canada to become a global leader in this mineral development for the critical industry. The market for critical minerals is growing because of this effort to decarbonize. So we're looking at building, as you mentioned, the EVs, and there's also other applications that, like wind farms that produce green power, but they require minerals, and that requires mining. And it is one of Canada's backbone industries. So the opportunity is to do what Canada does best, which is build a producing mineral industry and capitalize on this advantage. But looking at it from how we grow it, it requires both the building, but also the incentivizing focused on the decarbonization of the minerals as well. And looking at, I won't go too much into this because I think we're going to talk a bit later about that part of it, but I think it's really important to look at, we can be a participant in the decarbonization of globally with these applications, but the carbon footprint of the material we produce always has to be looked at. And at E3, it's one of the focuses that we have is producing a low to carbon neutral lithium product. And that is to feed this industry, because we've heard from companies like yourself, from the OEMs in the world, that's an incredibly important metric by which our lithium product that's going to go into the batteries is going to be measured, is by its carbon footprint. I think the challenge, though, for Canada, and the challenge I think that we need to put out there for us to accomplish is the rate at which we're moving. Yesterday, the White House had a roundtable announcing funding specifically to develop a U.S. domestic supply chain for critical minerals. And included in the funding were peers in the space that E3 lives in, which is the DLE technology to direct produce lithium products. It has been clear by both the federal government and even in Alberta, the local provincial government, that they've heard this cry from the industry about we need to take some action. We need to move towards these initiatives. And I think there's been a lot of discussion on that, and there's been a lot of panels that we've participated in that have been building that over the past couple of years. I think now we understand the challenge. The market is there. Like, there is a very strong market, especially for lithium, but for all of the materials that go into these batteries. But we need to, as Canadians, we need to take action. And I think that's the challenge, is that if we don't move now, we do risk not participating in the industry as Canadians. And there's also the part about building our own supply chain here. And I won't go into that, but that also needs to become a piece of it. The whole race to electrification, Canada needs to take hold of and run with starting now. So.
Thanks, Chris. Stefan or Kunal, anything to add?
Yeah, I think adding on to Chris and relating to the White House announcement, I think there's an opportunity here to do things similar to that, and then also, I mean, Scott, you know better than myself, but the automotive supply chain is so integrated. Even Detroit, Windsor, it's so integrated. But overall in the Northeast, and even as we talk about all of North America down through Mexico. So we shouldn't necessarily only look at this in isolation, but how do we integrate, if we're talking about automotive, that supply chain, and what pieces can we participate in, not only on the critical materials side, but then using those in the production, whether it's precursor or then even cell production. We haven't, as a country, necessarily been successful in attracting some of that investment, even though there's many cars built here that maybe even will be converted to electric as well.
And probably, Scott, if I may, probably I will add something that Chris said. I think speed is key. So going faster is again key, and it's a competition against other countries and other people. And I think we have what we need in Canada, but clearly we have to work together to see how we can develop new processes or implement new product much faster than we were doing in the past.
Thanks for that. I'll jump in quickly just with some follow-up myself, but Kunal mentioned the integration, and he's absolutely right. It's an integrated supply chain across North America. As a vehicle OEM, we have operations in Mexico, Canada, and the United States. We've got shared suppliers. If you were going to supply, for instance, a raw material into a battery operation that was going to supply Toyota, regardless of where that battery operation is, whether it's Canada, the US, or Mexico, you're probably going to supply all of us. So it's not just an opportunity in Canada, it's really an opportunity within the entire North American market. But, Stefan talked about speed, and Chris talked about, getting started, but how do we kickstart this? Because, as an OEM, for instance, we sometimes hear about a bit of a chicken or an egg when it comes to material supply, meaning, you on the front end, I'll say, need a customer, and sometimes to spur that sort of investment, and us on the back end, we need something that's ready made and available now, and there's a gap in between that. Any thoughts in terms of how we could kind of kickstart the entire process?
But probably I can say, we have a good example on Scandium. We have been developing a Scandium process, and I would say a Scandium business. And the way we have been doing it is because the market was almost not there. We find a way to make it as small as we can, to take a little bit risk, but not having to invest in big upfront capex before we start. So we find a way to do it differently, take a little bit more risk, but it's small. I always say to our people, you have to think big, and after, can you bring it as small as you can to start tomorrow morning? Stop studying, let's take some risk. If it's small, better trying than studying, but we have to find a way to bring that at lower size we can. And it's where we need some help, like with the government help, subsidies to help us to take those risks to go forward. But clearly, we see very good opportunities on that. But like you said, we have to start. We have to take some risks, how we can minimize those risks and try it, knowing that some won't work also. But when they are small, you are more willing to try a different way to get there.
Yeah, and I think I 100% agree that the philosophy there of just getting something going is not something that Canada generally does, as well as countries like Australia. The Australians are much better at just like getting something started, and then you build from there. We do a lot of development work ahead of it, and there's lots of reasons why and a lot of benefits to that. But the downside is that the pace. But I think the biggest thing from my perspective, Scott, is access to capital. And that is, it can come on lots of fronts. Government incentives is obviously the first one you might go towards, because the government can incentivize this industry by providing innovation funding, so new technology development, and Stefan talked about that as well. And we've been developing new technology. It's an important part of being able to advance these projects, but it also is creating an ecosystem for funding here locally that doesn't necessarily need to be supported through the federal or provincial governments, but can be industry supported by having building an ecosystem, building a system where companies who are in development mode can go and find that access to capital. And it exists in various different places, but it's not centralized around critical minerals, and those bringing, like you said, from the OEM side, like you just want the material. We need to just build a mine, or in our sense, a production facility to produce the brine. And often the two are at odds because it is the chicken and the egg. So I think bringing everyone together in that sense and creating something that allows access to funding in a pool that, and there's lots of ways that can. But anyway, I'll leave it there. I think there's a good opportunity.
Any other last thoughts before we move on? Okay, I will go on to the next one. So the next question focuses on cost and international opportunities. Reaching net zero will not be easy or inexpensive. Baseline estimates assume $2 trillion price tag for Canada to reach net zero by 2050. At the same time, Canadian natural resource products have a unique opportunity to displace carbon-intensive alternatives on international markets. While the latest UN climate change conference, COP26, provided an important platform for countries and businesses to demonstrate how they're taking action and mobilizing finance to support the transition to net zero, questions remain about financing our 2050 net zero goal. How can we leverage Canadian critical minerals as a driver of global decarbonization while supporting the financial costs of decarbonizing our own economy? And I'll start with Canal.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two parts in this question. One is how can we leverage the Canadian minerals? And I think we talked about it a little bit. Maybe there's a need for access to capital or quicker pace. But when we talk about leveraging Canadian critical minerals, again, it goes back to that integrated supply chain. How can we feed into the North American ecosystem? And as I said in my opening remarks, this is really going towards the idea of a localized supply chain, not dependent on imports when we talk about battery production. So I think those local resources of critical materials, let's say primary resources, will probably in the long run primarily feed the North American ecosystem. And you can complement that with groups like ourselves who are taking then the material out of the market, recycling it, bringing it back into the same supply chain. So how do we support the global development? I would say then, can we leverage technology developed here, whether it's recycling technology, I don't know, Chris, extraction technology that's been developed in Canada, and then deploy that in other markets so that we can take Canadian companies and grow them globally. And then I guess that kind of ties into the second point. We're an Ontario-based company. So if you have a company growing globally and all the tax implications are rolling into the Canadian company, then you're providing through your taxes a mechanism to support decarbonization. Are there better things or different ways to do that? Maybe we say that XYZ type of company, if you're in the critical material space, then a certain level of your contributions to the pool are focused on decarbonization. And maybe there's more incentives we can do. I read something the other day about, changing electricity rates in the time of use, for example, at night to spur EV adoption. So are there more programs like that? I guess you don't really need that right now with the gas prices. The economics look really good at the current rates anyway, but can you leverage tax dollars from, say, our company and Chris's company, because we're in the space, to focus on that? And I'll leave that to the policymakers to draft.
Chris or Stefan, anything to add?
Probably a good example of something we have some success with this is the project Elysis is something that we have been working with other aluminum producers and the governments, the different governments, is to develop a process to produce aluminum without CO2 emission. And we have been able to to succeed is almost working very well because we have very good collaboration as start between company and the government. Without that help, it would have been very difficult to develop that process. So collaboration is key, working together is key, and be able to bring help to start those ideas, because I think we have the know-how in Canada to do it, but it's how we work together, and again, we speed up that development to be ahead of the race.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, I agree with Cal in the sense, and Stefan in terms of collaboration. We look at the technology that we've developed. A plan for E3 is first and foremost to commercialize it, and we're working on that now. But once it's gotten to a certain point, and it's going to be there for us very, very soon, so you can look at it from a broader perspective. We do plan to license this technology out. The lithium market is going to well support lots of peers or competitors in the space, and whether or not they're affiliated to E3 doesn't really matter. If they're using an E3 technology, we can support the growth of our lithium industry by allowing and licensing our technology. It's a business unit for E3, obviously, but it obviously wouldn't be onerous enough that it wouldn't also create profit, and therefore would incentivize other companies to get going and open up other resources, and hopefully therefore grow the industry at a higher pace, because they don't have to spend the 5 years that E3 spent developing a new tech. They can just implement and go.
Any other thoughts? I've got a question actually for Kunal. We're looking at resource extraction, and we're also looking at materials recycling as inputs into eventually battery manufacturing. How much do you think can recycling contribute? Like how much, not just in terms of battery recycling, but even upstream processes, how much do you think could actually be reclaimed and input, and how much can that help? You're on mute, Kunal.
Yeah, you kind of have to go decade by decade, right? Right now, the recycling infrastructure is small, and we're in this massive growth phase of the number of cell plants that the Toyota plant that you've announced, right? It's going to be built in the next 3-4 years. A main feed source for us in the next 3 to 5 years is going to be scrap from those plants. So you don't really get to the high volumes of materials for recycling until later this decade. But by then, the number of batteries being made and the demand on critical materials has also gone through this enormous growth. So I would say by the end of the decade, you're say in a North American context, you're only getting to a sub few percent of the raw materials for the battery production from recycled sources. But at some point, when all these policies about not selling ICE engine vehicles, et cetera, kicks in, the total market of vehicles and the amount of EVs sold on a year-by-year basis isn't going to escalate as much. It's the number of new gigafactories isn't going to grow as much. And then, the latter part of this decade, when we start deploying more vehicles, those vehicles will come out at the end of the 2030s. So I think as we go through the 2030s, you'll start to see more and more penetration of recycled material. I've seen numbers, by 2040, you could easily get into the 30-40% range, because then you have more of a steady state of growth. We're not announcing gigafactories every 2 weeks and new models of vehicles every 2 weeks, right? We'll get into more of a steady state. So it's going to take time. So we're really at that really early stage of helping or working towards building the infrastructure to get to that stage. But at the same time, we still need a lot of new resources. The security of, a lot of OEMs are worried about security of supply of those raw materials to even hit the targets they've announced to date because of the limitation of availability of materials.
And I think that, that's a great point in terms of we really are at the beginning of an industry, and this industry is going to evolve, and it's going to be different in 10 years than it's going to be different in 20 years. For looking at this from a critical mineral side, that's where the opportunity lies, is that we're in on the ground floor right now, and we have foresight to see what this might become, but we don't actually know what path it's going to take in all of these areas. And I think there's so much opportunity that's going to be developed as side industries to the main EV battery industry, and I think the battery recycling is one of the first and biggest offshoots of this, and there will likely be others. And I think it does bring back that question of what else can be out there as this grows, and the opportunity for Canada as well.
And Scott, I will add also, recycling is a huge opportunity, but maximize the value of our waste stream in our existing plant is another big one. And in scandium, our scandium process is a good example. We just extract that scandium from a liquor that we were wasting in the past, and we can produce 3 times more than the world demand just doing that. We recover rare earth in our operation in Madagascar just on the waste stream. So we still also have a lot of opportunity within the current processes we have in Canada to extract those critical minerals also.
I think that's a really good point. And, Canal's companies largely focused on, recycling the end product, which would be a battery, and recover some of the materials. But I know looking inside of Toyota, we'll look at maybe 6 phases from, initial resource extraction all the way to cell manufacturing. And we get fallout at each of those phases. Like actually making battery cells is relatively inefficient. When you look at scrap through the entire process, we can get anywhere from 20 to 30% fallout. So ways to capture those loops and feed them back into the process, I think is really, really important. So move on to the next question. This will be focusing on sustainable development in the mining industry. While we've focused on the role of critical minerals relative to Canadian and global decarbonization, it's also important to turn our attention to how domestic supply chains are transitioning to become more environmentally sustainable. Many of the world's top mining companies have pledged to reach net zero by 2050. And there are ongoing calls to create closed-loop critical mineral supply chains. From a sustainability perspective, how do you believe the mining industry and critical mineral supply chains will evolve over the coming years? And what should the industry aim to accomplish by 2050? And I'll start with Stefan.
It's clearly that there is a fundamental trend towards sustainability and carbon neutrality. And us in Rio, we embrace the challenge by 2050. And probably you saw, we just made that challenge a little bit more difficult, that we say we want to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. We say we want to put up to $7.5 billion to help our operation to reach that target. And is a challenge. If you look at the scope 2, we know the solution. We know what to do probably. We just have to move towards a more clean energy or green energy. But in terms of scope 1, is the heart of our process. And it's clearly that we still have a lot of work to do to get to carbon neutral. But ELYSIS is a good example I was talking about. We found a pathway in Anonium to do it. You will hear probably more and more in coming weeks, coming months. We call that blue smelting with our titanium operation in Quebec. We developed a process that we think can help us to reach zero carbon emission. We are looking to build a demonstration plan by the end of this year. So we are speed up everything to be ready for 2030. But that will ask us also to have different materials and have different value supply or supply chain to feed those plans to get there. Without going too much in detail of that kind of process, but we need reduction, and it's clearly that one, it will be a new one. Often we talk about hydrogen, but we have others like biocharge and other materials that we are testing in our site. But clearly, if we are successful to do that, that will bring a new supply that I'm pretty sure that the Canadian company can supply. If we look also, the other thing we try to do, and in this example also, we have been working on developing lithium processes, and is how we can minimize also our footprint when we are mining. We talk often about recycling with lower footprint, but on the mining side, how can we mine with less impact on the community where we operate? And our process that we are testing in more wider scale is being able to mine or concentrate lithium without using any water, so no tailing, so to minimize the impact when we mine is an example. But clearly, we are committed to get there. Is again partnership, and we talk partnership with government and other company, but the other one for miner that is very, very, very important is the community with the community where we operate. And it's clearly in the coming years, if you don't have good relation with the community where you operate, it will be challenging.
Thanks, Stefan. Actually, I'll jump in quickly, just with a little bit of a follow-up question. So, you know, my company and most automotive OEMs have said they'll be carbon neutral at some point in the future. In our case, it's 2050, and that involves every aspect of our operation. It involves our supply chain, involves our logistics, our vehicle assembly, you know, everything. Do you think Canada has a unique advantage from a resource extraction point of view, or even a recycling point of view, from Canal's point of view? Just because we do have access to clean, you know, energy in a lot of parts in Canada, and you know, even with Chris being based out of Alberta, you've got opportunities with wind power and hydrogen, and companies and also you know, public entities are moving into that space. Does that position us well for success? Do you think you know, end users of products are focused enough on, you know, the clean benefits in Canada?
Clearly, if we look our side, clean energy is very, very helpful. It's like we have a clear advantage where we can capitalize on. The other one that we don't have to forget is our human resource. We have very, very good skill in Canada, a very good network with university, and it's the other one you need. You can have the green energy, but you need the brain to find new processes. And I think personally, I believe we have it. We have good resources, we still have to optimize them, but having, again, the right process linked to them is a clear advantage. And being in North America, close to one of the biggest market in the world with the US is very, very helpful. And the Scandium is a very good example. It's a market that have not grown in the past year, but since we started to see that we produce some, and we just starting to produce some in the coming days, is clearly we have a lot of interest being in North America, being able to supply Canadian company and US company.
And I think, yeah, adding to that, Stefan, you know, Scott, there's sort of two pieces. You brought up a good point, and you have certainly the perspective, you know, if you have a goal, if Toyota has a goal of, you know, zero carbon by 2050, that means that your supplier needs to also have that same goal. And so, you know, you're probably going to, in the future, make decisions when you have the flexibility in the market to do so, to choose a low carbon to no carbon product. And I think, you know, that's certainly the message we're getting. I think so that there'll probably be a natural progression in the marketplace to the low carbon, because they'll maybe get a bit higher price because they'll be more sought after, and the natural market will take over once the sort of big supply crunch fades away into the 2030s maybe. But I think the big part is if you want it immediately and you want to start incentivizing this, I think this is where the role of the government really comes into play in terms of funding. If the government wants this, and it looks like right now the current federal government does really want to decarbonize this. And I've said on panels with the previous Minister of Natural Resources, and very clear that was the goal of the federal government. It requires capital, and you know, whether or not you like the carbon tax that's coming in Canada now and escalating in price, there's a good pool of capital that could be redeployed out, so that you don't have to pay the carbon tax in the future. And that should be, it's just one idea, but it is that bringing that money back, bringing money into industry like mining, which is, it's not simple. It's not a simple thing, to decarbonize mining. You're going to elect fleets. And that brings a whole other complication into it that is achievable. And as Stefan said, there's the innovations here in Canada. There are companies doing that. So it's not a pipe dream by any stretch. We have an advantage at E3. We joke sometimes that we're brines, not mines, because we don't actually mine anything. We pump out the fluid like an oil and gas well would, which is why we get coined petrolithium. Is, we have that ability to produce without a surface impact. Carbon is obviously the first metric that people, because it's a number, so you can go to that and look at that number. But I think Stefan was mentioning there's all these other aspects that you can do to a project to increase its environmental performance that aren't its carbon emissions, and engage on that. And I think looking at the broad perspective, that also should be incentivized, finding new technologies that reduce tailings and that sort of thing, and across Canada.
I think that's a good point. And, one of the things you said early on was around, people making choices, and, a company like Toyota, in the early stages, you might be looking at just the best, source at the best cost. But later on, if you're going to be trying to hit some environmental target, you might make different decisions. Meaning you might favor someone that's, more green, or using less carbon in, extraction or processing parts. So I think it's a very valid point. Any last thoughts on that one? If not, we'll move on to the next question. So this is around Canadian leadership opportunities. Toyota's global manufacturing operations utilize a concept called Yokoten. And it's a Japanese concept that roughly translates to best practice sharing across an organization. We like to develop a good idea and then we share it within Toyota. It's a good way to proliferate good ideas. In practice, this means that when a specific manufacturing location creates a significant process improvement, it gets integrated across all of our global network. With this concept in mind, and with a focus on decarbonization, what are recent examples and future opportunities for Canadian critical mineral supply chains to support environmental leadership in global critical mineral supply chains? Further, how can Canadian critical minerals leadership chip away at China's significant export in this space? I'll just open that up to anyone.
Yeah, maybe from a recycling perspective, Canada's punching above their weight. Besides us, there's 3 other groups that have some technology around lithium-ion battery recycling at some stage, not commercial, all of them. But if you look in the US, there's also only a handful. So when you compare the size of the countries, we have technology being developed here. So if we talk about one opportunity for us to take leadership, it's I talked about technology before, but how do we leverage Canadian developed technology? I think some of that comes from the fact that we have a strong mining and metals industry here. So you have that expertise of how to refine and create these products. So how do we build upon that and take that, whether it's in North America or across the world, as, let's say, a technology leader for producing these materials?
Are there any other best practices that we can draw upon?
I think that the industry, Canada is often touted as a leader in its environmental stewardship when it comes to mining, and it's because that we have standards and the standards are upheld. There's obviously always improvements, and the world evolves, and so those policies would likely need to evolve with them. And decarbonization is currently one of the big trends that's sort of on the forefront, I think, of coming into the mining industry. But I think again, always room for improvement, but I think Canada does very, very well at environmental stewardship. And so I think that looking at it from the supply chain, and not just the critical minerals, but the next pieces, there are companies that are looking at building batteries that are focused on low carbon sources of power to produce their product, and those would also have to follow the Canadian guidelines for the batteries, and it should be encouraging, therefore, for companies that are buying products that are made from Canada to know that they're produced responsibly, that know where they're coming from, that has a chain of custody from the very source, and they can see, you know, what went into the labor force to make it, what went into the impact in terms of carbon to make that product, the surface impact. All of those things are transparent in Canada. So I think that has a huge benefit to, you know, what we can offer the global economy as a critical material. It can't be understated how important that will be and is today.
Oh, it's a good response. Stefan or Canal? Anything else?
I would probably add also in with the Toyota mindset is, and we started to do that more and more, is discussion between miner and end user to make sure that we understand exactly what the end user want and what their need and how we can work together. So is to streamline the discussion between the start of I would say the product in the earth and with the final use, and more we make that communication streamless. If I can get more much easier, I'm pretty sure we'll discover other opportunities. And I always remember from some many with Toyotas how we can always reduce the waste. So time is waste, and how we can streamline that to make everything more efficient.
It's absolutely true. I think trying to eliminate any waste from any process is a good outcome. Questions from the audience now. So the first one is on creating a North American supply chain for critical minerals. What are the near-term milestones that you think we could need to advance? Is there anything we need to do in the near future as a country, as an industry?
Yeah, I think if we look at the whole battery supply chain, I mean, there've been some rumors, some announcements, but it's still far away. The critical piece we're still missing is the precursor. So we can produce individual products, nickel sulfate, cobalt sulfate. We have cell manufacturing now, but this precursor at cathode active material is still a huge gap. And I think there is sort of momentum behind it. I think there will be announcements over time because everything seems to be geared towards 2025 with a lot of ramp up towards that. But I know from previous government consultations in Canada, there was a lot of focus on how do we bring a cell manufacturer here, which has had some success, right? We have British Volt coming to Quebec. But tying into critical materials, I mean, that's the PCAM section really ties into this discussion and where we do have the resources. And back to your question, Scott, of how do we get more recycled content penetrating into the material? I mean, those facilities have a large scale, so we have to work together. It's got to be blending both primary and secondary material, and over time, the secondary material increases. So I think there's a good opportunity there to really close the whole supply chain, but we need to attract some of the experts in that field.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because we, meaning Toyota in North America, will be making our own batteries. Some of the companies will buy them from a vendor or a strategic partner, but those companies, the battery makers, they're not buying nickel or cobalt. They're buying processed chemicals, precursors, things. There's really a gap in between things that are in the ground that and things that go into a cell, that go into a battery, that go into a car. And I've heard similar developments that hopefully we'll hear things in the not too distant future about large investments in that space. But any other thoughts on that, about that kind of gap in between Canada's, I'll say, two strengths, which is one on the front end, which is we've got availability of resources, and one more on the back end, and we've got a huge automotive industry here.
And Scott, probably I will add something also, is how we can make our technical research people talking together. If I look at Rio, we have two very important research centers in Quebec. We have the Aluminum Research Center, so it's the one leading all the research for the aluminum group in the world. And in our division in iron titanium, we have also a research center, and we have been given the mandate to develop all the critical mineral process. So how we can put those guys together, and the scandium is a good example. Why we have been able to develop the scandium/scandium aluminum is because we just put our two research center talking together, and with that we create a new opportunity. So I'm pretty sure that if we don't know in Canada what we have in terms of technical expertise, more we communicate and we put those people in contact with a new kind of goal, I'm pretty sure we have the skill to raise to that challenge.
And I look at what's happening in Canada as we build more and more capacity for the critical minerals. E3, at the end of the day, we're a specialty chemical company. That's what we will be doing. And the division of E3 that produces the lithium hydroxide or carbonate into the market is going to become a very specialized chemical processing part of the company, and with that skill set highly developed. And so I think it offers the opportunity inherently to build, and I think E3's open up our doors to this in that sense, is to actually exactly what Canal's saying, build cathode here. Because we have a lot of the equipment, we have a lot of the expertise. E3 is not out inventing a new active cathode material. That's not our business. But there are companies out there, and the list is not big, but there are companies out there that supply a lot of the world's cathode material. And so we would have a manufacturing facility that's producing other products that could be easily, small additions that could make cathode in partnership, and then produce a product that can be sold. And I think we do have a goal of building that industry here locally in Alberta, but I think the vertical integration is going to come. You're going to see, as we talked about the evolution of this industry, I think as it evolves, the vertical integration from source where it makes sense. And in Canada, I think we have opportunity because it does make sense. We have good access to people power, we have good access to infrastructure, we have good access to power. And so therefore we have all of the tools relative to elsewhere that makes lithium products that would be a much harder job to do, to build a cathode plant at the top of the Andes. But we can do it in Quebec, we can do it in Alberta.
No, I agree completely. I get asked this question a lot, as an OEM operating in Canada, and a lot of discussion around batteries. Batteries are inherently very, very heavy. When you look at the class of battery that you would put in a fully electric vehicle, you're talking about something that's 1,000 pounds, and shipping that across long distances, global supply chains is extremely inefficient. And if you looked at the actual construction of the battery, the cells are probably 80% of the weight. Majority of the weight going into the cell is the cathode and the anode. And having that close by, somewhere like Ontario or Quebec, that's close by to the end user, which is going into a battery, it's going into a car, is critically important. And I think if we develop that space in the middle, whether it's precursors or CAM, that becomes a strategic strength for Canada, as opposed to just focusing on the resources themselves, because they could really be shipped anywhere and turned into anything somewhere else. I think we're out of time for questions, and I've managed actually to keep us on schedule. So that's fantastic. We do have some time though, where I'm going to turn it over to each of you for just a few minutes for closing comments and final thoughts. And I will start with Stefan.
Probably we can see the coming years as a challenge, but personally I see that as a huge opportunity for Rio. And Rio, we want to be a key player in helping or making Canada a leader in critical mineral materials. Clearly in Canada, we have the resource, we have the strong human capital, we have the supportive and collaborative environment. So I think we have all the ingredients to to go to that challenge. To make it easier, and we have just to be aware, but everything is time and is a race, and we have all to find ways to make those improvements faster. So how we can simplify everything to make us quicker and quicker is a race, and us, we are willing to be part of that race in making Canada much better in critical minerals.
Thank you, Stefan. Chris?
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I think, what we're building in Canada right now, we're laying a foundation to be part of this industry, to be part of the critical minerals movement. And Canada has a big part to play in the deglobalization of supply chain in that sense. And I agree with Scott, your comment that, it makes the most sense to build these things locally. It doesn't make as much sense to build them in Asia or even in Europe and then boat them across, especially considering that it could be that our material is going to go there, which is the habit of Canada right now, to ship the raw material and buy it back. And I think because we're on the ground floor, we have the opportunity to build a whole industry, the whole vertical integration in Canada, and we should really seize the opportunity. And the action does take, words, it's easy to say we need to take action. And you brought that point up as well. Like, what do we need to do? And I think that needs to be the focus. We need to collaborate. And I think a lot of the comments today were on the collaboration. We have innovative people, we have innovative companies. We can bring that together. We can bring in a collaborative financing system as well, because that is the critical piece that is always required, is you have to have the capital to build these things, and that gets deployed systematically to build this industry, and build then therefore an ecosystem, a whole ecosystem where new technology can grow and Canada could be a big player.
I agree. I'm not sure that developing something in Canada and boating it across the ocean only to bring it back is really supporting everybody's carbon neutrality objectives. It's a good point. And then finally, Kunal.
Great. And I'll start with one anecdote, because we mentioned shipping batteries a few times, but one of the challenges that gets highlighted is this cargo ship that caught fire recently. And even if the fire was there and then the batteries fueled it, this just creates more logistical problems, even if it wasn't the battery's fault, around shipping cars or batteries around the world. So it highlights some of the challenges we face as an industry. But I think I'm glad to see the four of us generally had a similar view that there's a great opportunity, there's momentum behind this industry. And I think there's also a window of opportunity here to help set up the industry for the future, or the future automotive industry, basically. And working together, I think we can develop a local ecosystem, and Canada can play a big part of it. I think we've identified opportunities that everyone knows, for example, the PCAM and CAM gap. And I think to what Chris was saying, how do we then work together to fill that? And it's really a timing and pace issue. And how do you get that timing and pace? You need technology, you need the money to invest so that we can be a participant in this, rather than getting beat out by our neighbors to the south.
Thanks, Kunal. I think we can all agree that the last thing on earth we need right now is more logistical challenges. I can say from personal experience over the last few weeks, smooth flow of materials would be a wonderful state to be in. And I'll just acknowledge that, Chris had mentioned early on that, we are really talking about a nascent industry. It's the beginning for a lot of it. You get a lot of conversations about what needs to happen first and how do you get things started. As a vehicle maker in North America that currently doesn't make a battery electric vehicle here, I can say that we do have plans to quickly accelerate, and I think we're in the boat with other like-minded companies, but it really is just at the beginning, and I think it's a big opportunity for companies and entities in Canada to really carve out a space there, in order to succeed in not only the Canadian, but also the North American and even the global markets. So thank you all. I thought it was a good discussion, interesting points brought up, and I appreciate your time today.